The next weeks, what does it mean to follow Jesus?
More than do.
Excuse me?
More than do.
More than do. And you know, this is a progressive thing. At first, to follow him means, for initially it means to leave our own lives. Jesus called the disciples, early disciples, there by the ocean. He says they left their nets and they followed him. First it means leaving something. Then it means going. What's interesting, I don't believe following him at first has anything to do with believing in him. Nothing. Those early people that followed him, they didn't even know what they were doing. They didn't believe. Everybody was an unbeliever at first. He's just calling people, I dare you to follow him. Something's going to happen. Forget about your beliefs at this point. I'd like to open up with Matthew. Did you see, talks about, Matthew talks about Matthew. And here's the passage in Matthew 9. Jesus went on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. And Matthew's talking about himself there. Now this was by a lake there, and there was a tax collector's booth because back then tax collectors, they were looked so down upon, because what happened is the Roman government hired people from the villages and the towns in Judea to collect taxes for the Roman government, and that they were able to scrape off the top of that to make their own. So there were taxes. There was wine tax. There was a property tax. There was a shipping tax. There were all sorts of taxes, and it was laborious. And these tax collectors were looked down on. The feeling was hatred. It's the same feeling that in our culture we would have for the young. No, it would be like the, I don't know, the 30-year-old guy who's selling drugs to teenagers. I mean, disgusting. It's looked at with disgust, because these people were their own. I'm taking money from my friends. Matthew is a Jewish man, but he's parted ways, and it's not looked good at all. So here's this guy that everybody's looking down on. Jesus has not, at this point in Matthew, officially got his 12 yet. People are following him, and Jesus is around, and some of his disciples are there, but it's not clear exactly who Jesus is quite yet, and he's focusing on things. Sermon on the Mount's been preached by then, and it's clear that there's a movement of some sort started. Now here they are in front of this tax collector's booth. Matthew's collecting taxes, and Jesus says, "Follow me." What do you think Peter or Thomas are saying at that point? We need a little meeting. We need to have a discussion about Matthew joining this thing that's going on here. What? Matthew, follow. What I find interesting is that Jesus did not say, leave your tax collector position and follow me. He just said, follow me. I think many times we say, if you're willing to do this or not do this, then you can follow Jesus. You know, if you're willing to let that go and not do that anymore and do this and start doing this and do what Jesus says, then you can follow. There's Jesus. Guy's an active tax collector. He didn't say hand in your card. Follow me. Just follow. What? Now look at the next verse. Well, Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. All of a sudden, we're going from Matthew is being called, hey, guess what, Matthew? We're having dinner at your house. Jesus seemed to do this different times. Remember Zacchaeus? Yeah. When he came by and there was Zacchaeus, because he was a short guy, he had to get up in the tree. He says, Zacchaeus, how you doing? We're going to have dinner at your home. And they had dinner at his home, and just this time with Jesus, all of a sudden Zacchaeus' conscience got awakened and said, you know what? I'm going to pay back X number fold more of the people that I stole from. He didn't say, Zacchaeus, you're just you got to give up all that stuff and then, maybe we can have lunch. Well, Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. Now look at this. Many, say many. Many tax collectors. Now, how does it feel for the disciples now? There's just not Matthew. Birds of a feather flock together, so Matthew knows tax collectors. Now look at tax collectors and sinners. What's the difference between a tax collector and a sinner?
Nothing.
I'm not sure. I don't think sinners wanted to be associated with tax collectors, so tax collectors are a little bit lower. There's tax collectors and then there's sinners. But there's sinners, but at least I ain't a tax collector. Many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. How do you think the disciples are dealing with this thing?
They're not.
We're eating together, we're having a good time. Who knows what's going on there? It's an interesting occasion. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples. Now, where do you think the Pharisees are?
Probably.
Where do you think they are? Do you think Matthew said, come on in?
They're probably outside.
They're probably outside. They're probably outside. I agree, because they do the God says. God says this, God says this. They play the God says game. God says you got to do this. God says you don't do this. God says you need to do this. And the Pharisees, the disciples are probably weirded out. The Pharisees are weirded out. The only one that's not weirded out are the tax collectors and sinners and Jesus. They understand what's going on. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" I can't put my head around it. Jesus is a holy man. We are holy people. Holy people hang out together. We separate ourselves from unholy people. We got to be the example. We don't want the unholy people to rub up on those holy people. I don't know what all the thinking is, but there's this aspect that you just don't do this. You don't associate with tax collectors and sinners. You just don't do this. Now it's interesting, evidently this rumble of why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners got to Jesus somehow. Because in the next verse, Jesus says, on hearing this, he says, maybe to some of his disciples, tell them this. Just go out there and tell them. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. It's not the healthy who need a doctor. It's the sick people who need a doctor. Now, where's Jesus saying this? Right, and if anybody had any ears open, what do you think Matthew would be saying? Wait a minute. You're calling me sick. What do you think? But you know what? I think Jesus was so winsome. I think we all know it, don't you? Don't you know it? You're sick. We need a doctor. We need help, don't we? Once we think that we don't need help anymore, we start becoming the Pharisees and playing the Jesus said game. And we start comparing ourselves and looking down and getting into judgmentalism. I've seen myself do it. And I hate it. It's not the healthy who need a doctor. What do you think Matthew's saying? Jesus. And what do you think Jesus said? Matthew, you're a tax collector. Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, I've got problems. And you know what? You're right. Then probably some of his buddies say, yeah, we're sick, and they're high-fiving each other, and the party just goes on. And then Jesus adds this. And he's telling the Pharisees to go and learn. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Look up that passage in Hosea. It's in Hosea. Just look it up this week. It's an interesting passage. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. What's the problem with sacrifice? I think sometimes we think if we sacrifice, we make up for things. If I give this or do this or don't do this, then my relationship with God is going to... I think we try to make up for bad behaviors. I really don't want to get into that Hosea passage, but it would be good to look it up. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Good news! This is great news! A prerequisite for Jesus calling you to follow Him is what? You're a sinner. If we don't go there, we'll stand on the outside like the Pharisees again. And this is what I say. We dare not become a church that's content to focus on gathering together and believing the right things and behaving the right ways and stop there. If we do, I'm afraid we will find ourselves standing outside the very room that Jesus inhabits. Just like the Pharisees are standing outside. We're going to be standing outside. Jesus came to call the sick, the sinners, and those who need a Savior. That's where Jesus is alive. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? I can't answer that in totality. But I do know that those who follow closely to Him, Jesus gave an indication in Matthew 4 when He called Peter and John. He says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. As we follow Jesus, one of the indicators